The great hall of the Galactic Council felt empty. Ambassador Szeth walked across the smooth metal floor, his 4 legs clicking with each step. The sound echoed in the huge space where hundreds of beings from different worlds used to gather every day. Now, only 50 representatives sat in their floating chairs, scattered like lost stars in a dark sky. 3 months had passed since the humans left. All of them. Every single human in the galaxy had vanished on the same day, at the same time. No warning, no goodbye, no explanation. Szeth remembered that day well. He had been talking to Ambassador Tay Rim about trade routes between his home planet and the human colonies. She was a small woman with kind eyes, who always listened carefully before speaking. They were supposed to meet again the next morning to finish their discussion. But when he arrived at her office, it was empty. Her desk was clean. Her computer was gone. Even her coffee cup had been washed and put away. "Good riddance," said Commander Vorthak from across the hall. His red skin gleamed under the artificial lights, and his sharp teeth showed when he smiled. Those humans were getting too big for their boots, always sticking their noses where they did not belong. Many others had said the same thing in the past 3 months. The humans had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago, but they had spread everywhere quickly. Too quickly, some said. They learned languages fast, made friends with everyone, and somehow ended up involved in almost every important decision. The Zalathi delegation whispered among themselves in their crystal voices. Szeth could hear them saying the humans had been dangerous. They grew too smart too fast. They asked too many questions. They wanted to change too many old ways of doing things. Even the wise Makari, who usually stayed out of politics, had admitted privately that humanity worried them. The tree-like beings had lived for thousands of years and moved very slowly in everything they did. Humans moved fast, thought fast, and changed things fast. It made the ancient Makari nervous. But as Szeth sat in his floating chair and looked around the nearly empty hall, he felt something was wrong. The council meetings used to run smoothly. Every species could talk to every other species without problems. The translation systems worked perfectly. Documents moved between offices quickly. Important decisions were made without long delays. Now everything felt broken. Yesterday, the morning briefing had been 30 minutes late because the translation system kept making mistakes. The Pelagian representative could not understand what the Theron delegate was saying, even though they had been working together for years. Simple words came out wrong. Important meanings got lost. The week before, a trade dispute between the Outer Rim colonies had taken 3 days to resolve instead of 3 hours. The mediator kept asking for documents that used to appear on his screen automatically. Instead, he had to send requests to different offices and wait for answers that sometimes never came. Szeth pulled up his datapad and looked at the reports that had been coming in from across the galaxy. Supply ships were arriving late at stations throughout the Andromeda sector. The communication network between the core worlds and the frontier had been running slowly for weeks. Some research stations had gone completely silent. Their weekly reports simply stopped coming. "Technical difficulties," Admiral Kree had said when asked about these problems. "Old systems breaking down. We will fix them soon." But Szeth was not so sure. He had been working in galactic politics for 20 years, and he had never seen so many small problems happen at the same time. It was like watching a machine slowly fall apart, one piece at a time. He remembered Captain Juan, the human, liaison officer who used to sit 3 seats down from him in these meetings. Juan never said much. but he always seemed to know when problems were about to happen. He would quietly send messages to the right people or suggest small changes that prevented bigger issues later. The last time Zeth saw Juan, the captain had been working late in his office, uploading files to the central database. When Zeth asked what he was doing, Juan had smiled sadly and said he was just making sure everything was properly organized. You never know when someone might need to find important information quickly, Juan had said. Now Zeth wondered what those files contained and why Juan had seemed so sad. Dr. Bomb's research station in the neutral zone had been one of the first to go dark. The human scientist had been studying how different species could work together more effectively. Her reports always included practical suggestions that seemed obvious once she pointed them out, but somehow no one else had thought of them first. The station's automatic systems were still running, but no new research was being published. The experiments that Dr. Bomb had been conducting with volunteers from 12 different species had been abandoned halfway through. Zeth had tried to contact her assistant, a young Zalathi researcher, but received only an automated message saying the project was temporarily suspended. Council Leader Vextar called the meeting to order, his deep voice booming through the hall's speakers. But even he seemed different now, less confident, more uncertain. In the past, the ancient reptilian leader had always known exactly what to say and when to say it. Human advisors used to whisper suggestions in his ear before important votes. They would hand him data pads with the latest information or remind him of small details that mattered. Now he read from prepared notes and paused often, as if waiting for someone to tell him what to do next. The first item on today's agenda was a request for emergency food supplies from the agricultural world of Series 7. The planet's crops were failing, and they needed help urgently. In the past, this kind of request would have been handled quickly. Someone would have known exactly which worlds had extra food, how to transport it safely, and how to coordinate with local authorities. But today, the council members looked at each other with confused expressions. No one seemed to know where to start. Perhaps we should form a committee to study the problem, suggested the Makari representative, his wooden voice creaking with age. Yes, agreed several others. A committee would be wise. Zeth felt a chill run through his body. 3 months. Ego, Ambassador Tay Rim would have already had a solution ready. She would have known which human merchants were traveling in that sector, which species had compatible food supplies, and how to arrange everything within hours instead of days. As the meeting dragged on with no real decisions being made, Zeth began to understand something that frightened him. The humans had not conquered the galaxy. They had not forced anyone to depend on them. They had simply seen problems and fixed them, one small solution at a time. And now they were gone, taking all those solutions with them. 2 weeks had passed since the emergency council meeting, and the problems were getting worse. Ambassador Zeth stood in his office, looking out at the space station's docking bay through the large window. Only half the usual number of ships were there, and most of them looked like they were having trouble. The merchant vessel Star Dancer had been sitting in Bay 7 for 3 days. Its captain, a blue-skinned Aquarian, kept sending frustrated messages to the station authorities. His cargo hold was full of rare crystals from the Zalathi homeworld, but he could not find anyone to buy them. The human traders always knew who needed what, the captain had told Zeth yesterday. They spoke our language and understood our customs. They knew which species could not touch Zalathi crystals directly and which ones needed them for their technology. Now I sit here with valuable cargo and no idea where to sell it. The same story was being repeated all across the galaxy. Zeth had received dozens of reports from trade stations, mining colonies, and manufacturing worlds. Business was slowing down everywhere. Engineer Dam had been responsible for maintaining the power systems on 17 different space stations. The humans had called it routine maintenance. But Zeth was beginning to understand that nothing about human work had been routine. Dam's systems had been designed to work with many different types of alien technology. Vorthak military ships used plasma generators. Makari vessels grew their own organic power sources. Zalathi ships ran on crystal matrices that most species could not even touch safely. Somehow, Dam had created backup systems that could handle all of these different technologies. When a Vorthak ship docked next to a Makari vessel, the station's power grid would automatically adjust to provide the right type of energy to both ships without any problems. Now those backup systems were failing. The automatic adjustments were not working properly. Yesterday, a Zalathi ship had tried to dock at Station Gamma 12, but the power coupling had been wrong. The ship's crystal matrix had overloaded, and the entire docking bay had lost power for 6 hours. It was just bad luck, the station commander had reported. Old equipment breaking down at the wrong time. But Zeth was seeing too many reports of bad luck to believe it was all coincidence. Trader Hyun had run a small shipping business that most people barely noticed. She carried supplies and messages between worlds that other merchants thought were too small or too difficult to bother with. Her ship was old and not very fast, but she had somehow made friends everywhere she went. The Pelagian colonies in the water sector had always been difficult to trade with. Their cities were underwater, and most species could not visit them safely. The Theron mining stations were located in areas with dangerous radiation that made communication difficult. Most merchants avoided both places, but Hyun had figured out how to solve these problems. She had learned to use special underwater containers that the Pelagians could handle easily. She had installed radiation shielding on her ship that let her visit the Theron stations safely. More importantly, she had learned both languages and understood both cultures well enough to translate between them when they needed to trade with each other. The Pelagians produced a type of algae that the Therons needed for their life support systems. The Therons mined rare metals that the Pelagians used in their underwater cities. It seemed like a simple trade, but no one had been able to make it work until Hyun started carrying messages and goods between them. Now, with Hyun gone, both colonies were in trouble. The Pelagians' algae farms were producing more than they could use, but they had no way to contact the Theron miners. The Therons were running low on the metals they needed, but they did not know how to reach the Pelagian cities safely. Dr. Jin's medical research had seemed like a small part of galactic healthcare. She ran just 12 research stations scattered throughout the galaxy, studying diseases that affected multiple species. Most doctors focused on their own species because alien biology was too different and too complicated to understand. But Jin had been different. She had spent years learning how diseases moved between species and how treatments that worked for one type of being might help another. Her research had led to vaccines and medicines that saved lives throughout the galaxy. The plague that started on Kepler Station was exactly the kind of problem Jin would have solved quickly. The disease had jumped from the station's Vorthak crew to the Makari maintenance workers, but it affected each species differently. The Vorthak got sick, but recovered in a few days. The Makari became much sicker, and some were dying. Local doctors knew how to treat their own species, but they did not understand how the disease changed when it moved between different types of beings. Without Jin's research data and her knowledge of cross-species medicine, they could only guess at the right treatment. The death count on Kepler Station was rising every day. But the worst problem was with the Galactic Communication Network. What? Humans had called the Internet connected billions of beings across thousands of worlds. It let a Zalathi artist share crystal songs with Makari poets, and Vorthak military officers coordinate with Pelagian naval forces. The system translated languages, converted data formats, and made sure messages reached the right recipients. Dr. Baum had worked on the network's translation systems. She had understood that each species thought differently, not just spoke differently. Vorthak minds were direct and focused on immediate action. Makari thoughts were slow and considered many long-term consequences. Zalathi consciousness was shared among many individuals working together. When a Vorthak commander sent a message to a Makari general, the translation system did more than change the words from one language to another. It also changed the style and timing to match how each species naturally communicated. A quick, urgent Vorthak battle report would become a detailed, thoughtful analysis when it reached a Makari leader. Now the translation systems were breaking down. Messages were being translated word for word, but the meaning was getting lost. A Vorthak request for immediate action was being sent to Makari leaders exactly as written, causing panic among beings who needed time to think carefully before making decisions. Makari requests for careful consideration of long-term consequences were frustrating Vorthak commanders who needed quick answers to urgent questions. Council leader Vextar had called another emergency meeting, but even that was proving difficult. The meeting room's communication system kept having technical problems. When the Zalathi delegation tried to participate through their shared crystal network, their words came through as jumbled noise. The Pelagian representative's underwater communication pod had trouble connecting to the station's systems. In the past, human technicians had quietly solved these problems before anyone noticed them. They had understood how to make different technologies work together smoothly. Now, with the humans gone, every small incompatibility was becoming a major obstacle. Zeth watched Admiral Kree struggle with his datapad during the meeting. The device kept switching between different display formats, trying to show information in ways that made sense to different species. One moment, it would show text in the linear style that Vorthak minds preferred. The next moment, it would shift to the circular interconnected diagrams that Zalathi consciousness found natural. The Admiral, who was Makari, needed information presented as branching tree structures that showed how decisions led to consequences over time. Without human programmers to maintain the system's adaptive interfaces, it was breaking down into chaos. "We need to find them," Admiral Kree said, his wooden voice creaking with frustration. "The humans must be somewhere. Ships cannot just disappear." But they had searched everywhere. Human colonies throughout the galaxy were empty, but undamaged. No signs of violence or struggle. No indication of where everyone had gone. It was as if millions of humans had simply decided to leave at exactly the same moment, taking everything important with them. As Zeth left the failed meeting and walked back to his office, he passed the empty desk where Ambassador Tay-Rim used to work. Someone had put a small plant there, hoping to make the space feel less empty. But the plant was already dying because no one knew how to care for it properly. Tay-Rim had always known exactly what each species needed to feel comfortable and welcome. She had kept the temperature just right, played music that everyone could enjoy, and served food that did not accidentally poison anyone. Small things that made big differences. Looking at the dying plant, Zeth finally understood what was really happening. The humans had not left because they were angry or afraid. They had left because they knew that everyone else needed to learn how to solve problems without them. The question was, would the galaxy learn fast enough to survive? 1 month after the humans disappeared, the galaxy was falling apart. Ambassador Zeth stood in the emergency command center that had been set up in the lower levels of the council station. Red warning lights flashed on dozens of monitors, each one showing a different crisis happening somewhere in the galaxy. The room buzzed with the sound of panicked voices speaking in many different languages. "Power grid failure on Sigma Colony," announced a Vorthak technician, his red skin gleaming with sweat. "They have maybe 6 hours before life support shuts down." "The food riots on Series 7 are getting worse," added a Makari representative, her wooden voice slow and sad. 3 people died yesterday. Agricultural systems failing on 12 different worlds, reported the Zalathi delegation through their shared crystal network. Their words sounded like breaking glass. Crop yields down 60% and falling. Zeth felt exhausted. He had been working 18-hour days for weeks, trying to coordinate rescue efforts and emergency supplies. But every time they solved one problem, 3 more appeared somewhere else. The worst part was that they were starting to understand how much humans had really done. Professor Nari's old research files had been discovered on an abandoned human research station. Her work had been about something she called systems integration, how to make different parts of a complex system work together smoothly. The files showed that humans had quietly redesigned huge parts of galactic civilization, not by force or conquest, but by solving small problems one at a time. Each solution had made things work a little better, a little more efficiently. But taken together, all those small improvements had created a network that depended on human knowledge and human oversight. Engineer Dam's power systems were everywhere. Zeth's team had found them on over 300 space stations, mining colonies, and research outposts. Each system had been carefully designed to work with the specific mix of alien technologies found at that location. Dam had somehow learned to make Vorthak plasma generators work safely next to Makari organic power sources and Zalathi crystal matrices. But the systems were not just copying old alien technology. Dam had improved everything she touched. Vorthak ships that docked at her stations used 30% less fuel. Makari vessels grew their organic components twice as fast. Zalathi crystal matrices lasted years longer before burning out. Now, without Dam's maintenance and upgrades, the systems were breaking down. Worse, no one else understood how they worked. The improvements were so seamlessly integrated with existing technology that alien engineers could not tell where their original systems ended and human modifications began. Captain Eugene security reports painted an even more troubling picture. The human patrol officer had been responsible for just one small sector near the neutral zone, but her work had prevented dozens of conflicts from turning into wars. The files showed that Eugene had not just been patrolling empty space. She had been quietly monitoring communication channels, tracking the movement of suspicious ships, and identifying problems before they became dangerous. When tensions rose between different species, she would arrange for accidental encounters that let both sides save face while backing down from conflict. 3 weeks ago, a trade dispute between Vorthak merchants and Pelagian colonies had escalated into threats of military action. In the past, Eugene would have stepped in with a solution that let both sides get what they needed. This time, no one had noticed the problem until Vorthak warships were already moving toward Pelagian space. The conflict had been stopped, but barely, and only after several minor battles that left ships damaged and crew members injured. Doctor. Min's medical records revealed something even more shocking. The human physician had not just treated humans. She had been quietly providing medical care to diplomatic staff from all species, often working behind the scenes to treat problems that could have caused major political embarrassments. The files showed that many important alien leaders had health problems they could not discuss with doctors from their own species. Makari elders sometimes developed diseases that their long-lived society considered shameful. Vorthak commanders had mental health issues that their warrior culture could not acknowledge. Zelathi individuals sometimes suffered from disconnection disorders that their collective consciousness found frightening. Min had learned to treat all of these conditions, and her patients had trusted her to keep their secrets. Now those leaders were struggling with untreated health problems that affected their judgment and decision-making abilities. But it was the discovery of the agricultural crisis that truly terrified everyone. Human botanists had been working on farms throughout the galaxy, making small improvements to crop yields and soil quality. Their work had seemed minor, just helping local farmers grow food more efficiently. But when Zeth's team analyzed the data, they found something horrible. Without human improvements, most agricultural worlds could not produce enough food to feed their populations. The efficiency gains had been so gradual that no one had noticed how dependent they had become. Worlds that had been self-sufficient 50 years ago now needed human-optimized crops and soil treatments to avoid famine. How did we not see this? Admiral Kree asked during an emergency briefing. The Makari officer looked older than his centuries, of age, his wooden skin gray with stress. Council leader Vextar stood at the head of the conference table, his massive reptilian form slumped with exhaustion. "Because they did not want us to see it," he said quietly. The humans were very careful to make their help seem small and unimportant. They never took credit for improvements. They never demanded recognition for their work. The Vorthak delegation had been studying human military records, trying to understand how their own forces had become so dependent on human advisors. What they found shocked even their warrior culture. Human officers like Admiral Kang had not been commanding alien troops or making tactical decisions. Instead, they had been serving as translators between different military traditions. Vorthak forces were aggressive and direct, preferring quick strikes and overwhelming force. Makari military doctrine was defensive and patient, focused on long-term strategic advantages. Zelathi combat tactics relied on perfect coordination between many small units. These approaches had always been incompatible. In the past, joint military operations had been almost impossible because each species fought in completely different ways. But human advisors had found ways to coordinate different military styles, creating combined forces that were stronger than any single species could field alone. Now, with the humans gone, joint operations were failing catastrophically. Different species could not work together effectively. Communication between fleets was breaking down. Even simple patrol missions were becoming dangerous when ships from different species tried to coordinate their movements. The transportation network was collapsing too. Trader Hyun and hundreds of other human merchants had been carrying more than just cargo between worlds. They had been carrying information, messages, and cultural exchanges that kept the galactic community connected. Without human traders visiting isolated colonies and frontier settlements, many worlds were becoming cut off from galactic civilization. Some colonies had been silent for weeks, Search and rescue missions kept finding settlements that were struggling with problems that could have been easily solved if they had been able to contact the right experts. But perhaps the most devastating discovery was about the children. Human. Teachers had been working in integrated schools throughout the galaxy, helping young beings from different species learn to work together. The humans had not been teaching human subjects or human values. Instead, they had been teaching alien children how to understand and communicate with other species. A generation of young beings had grown up thinking that cooperation between different species was natural and easy. They had learned to speak multiple languages, understand different cultures, and solve problems together. These children had been the hope for a more peaceful and unified galactic future. Now, without human teachers to guide them, many of these integrated schools were failing. Young beings were reverting to the prejudices and fears of their parents. The tolerance and understanding that had been growing for decades was disappearing in a matter of weeks. Szeth received a personal message that broke his heart. It was from a young Vorthak student named Kresh, who had been in one of the integrated schools on the core world of Nova Prime. "Ambassador Szeth," the message said, "my human teacher Ms. Nari left without saying goodbye. She was teaching us about how different species can work together to solve big problems. Now my Vorthak classmates say that other species are weak and stupid. My Makari friends say that Vorthak are violent and dangerous. I do not understand what happened. Why did the humans leave us? Why did they not tell us how to keep being friends?" As Szeth read the message, he finally understood the full scope of what had been lost. The humans had not just maintained galactic civilization's infrastructure. They had been nurturing its soul, teaching the next generation to be better than their parents, to overcome the ancient fears and prejudices that divided the galaxy. Standing in the command center surrounded by crisis reports and emergency warnings, Szeth realized that the humans had been giving the galaxy something. 2 months after the humans vanished, desperation drove the Galactic Council to authorize something they had never done before: a complete search of human space. Ambassador Szeth stood on the bridge of the exploration ship Unity's Hope, watching the blue marble of Earth grow larger on the main screen. This was humanity's birth world, the planet where their species had evolved. If answers existed anywhere, they would be found here. "No energy signatures detected," reported the ship's Vorthak sensor operator. "No active communication networks, no orbital traffic control." His voice carried disbelief. Earth had always been one of the busiest worlds in the galaxy, with thousands of ships arriving and departing every day. Captain Veltar, a Makari officer whose wooden skin was marked with centuries of growth rings, moved slowly toward the view screen. "The cities are still there," she said, her deep voice thoughtful. "I can see lights, but something feels wrong." They were right. As the ship entered Earth's atmosphere, Szeth could see that the human cities looked intact from above. Buildings stood undamaged. Transportation networks appeared complete, but there were no moving vehicles on the roads, no aircraft in the skies, no signs of life anywhere. The landing party found themselves walking through empty streets that should have been filled with millions of humans. Cars sat abandoned in perfect lines, as if their drivers had simply stepped out and walked away. Shops and restaurants had been closed and cleaned, but not destroyed or damaged. Agent So Young's apartment was discovered in the residential district of New Seoul. The search team found it exactly as she had left it, but with clear signs that her departure had been planned well in advance. Important documents were gone. Personal items of value had been removed, but everyday things like furniture and clothing remained behind. "Look at this," said Dr. Thel, the expedition's Zalathi archaeologist. Her crystal form sparkled as she pointed to marks on the floor. Heavy objects were moved here recently, multiple times, like they were practicing. The marks showed that large containers had been brought into the apartment, filled with selected items and then taken away. The pattern suggested this process had been repeated many times, as if So Young had been gradually moving her most important possessions over a period of weeks or months. Similar evidence was found throughout the city. Humans had been quietly preparing for their departure for a long time. They had sorted through their belongings carefully, taking what mattered most and leaving behind what they could replace. The evacuation had been planned with the same careful attention to detail that humans brought to everything they did. But where had they gone? The answer began to emerge when the search team discovered the underground facilities beneath the city. Massive tunnels and chambers had been carved out of the bedrock, equipped with advanced transportation systems and life support equipment. The engineering was impressive even by galactic standards, combining human innovation with technology borrowed from dozens of different species. Scientist Jun's research laboratory was found in one of the deepest chambers. Her computers had been wiped clean, but the physical evidence told an amazing story. Jun had been working on something called consciousness integration theory, a way to understand how different types of minds could work together more effectively. Her notes, written on paper and hidden in a sealed container, revealed that she had been studying the fundamental differences between how various species thought and made decisions. Humans processed information quickly and adaptively. Vorthak minds were focused and direct. Makari consciousness was slow and contemplative. Zalathi thought was collective and interconnected. Jun had believed that each type of thinking had unique strengths and that the galaxy's biggest problems could only be solved by combining different approaches. Her research had led to practical techniques for helping mixed species teams work together more effectively. But the most shocking discovery was her final conclusion. Human consciousness was naturally suited to serve as a bridge between other types of minds. Humans could understand and translate between different ways of thinking in ways that other species found difficult or impossible. This explained why humans had become so important to galactic civilization. They were not smarter than other species, but they were uniquely able to help others work together. Admiral Kang's strategic assessments were found in the military command bunker beneath the city. His files contained detailed analyses of 3 major threats that he believed would eventually face the galaxy. Each threat was so large and complex that no single species could handle it alone. The first threat was called the expansion. Kang's II data suggested that an aggressive machine intelligence was growing in the dark space between galaxies. This artificial mind was building ships and weapons, preparing to invade and conquer biological civilizations. Stopping it would require perfect coordination between all galactic species and their different military traditions. The second threat was the silence. Something was causing entire star systems to go dark and quiet, cutting off all communication with the outside galaxy. Kang believed this was not a natural phenomenon, but the work of an unknown enemy that specialized in destroying communication networks and isolating civilizations. The third threat was the hunger. A species of energy beings was moving through space, consuming the life force of entire worlds. They could not be fought with conventional weapons, only defeated by using the unique abilities of many different species working in perfect harmony. Kang's assessment was terrifying. Each of these enemies can only be defeated by the combined strengths of all galactic species working together. Humans must serve as coordinators and translators, helping others overcome their natural differences and fight as one. Without human mediation, the galaxy will fall to whichever threat reaches us first. The implications were clear. Humans had not left because they were angry or afraid of the other species. They had left because they knew these threats were coming, and they believed the galaxy needed to learn how to work together without human help. But the search teams found evidence that humans had not completely abandoned the galaxy. Hidden supply caches were discovered throughout human space, carefully concealed but marked with symbols that could be decoded by anyone who understood human thinking patterns. Each cache contained supplies and equipment that would be useful for the missing humans, but also communication devices designed to work with galactic networks. The caches were positioned along routes that led away from the galaxy's core, toward the empty space beyond the outer rim. The humans had gone somewhere outside the galaxy, but they had left a trail that could be followed. The most important discovery was made in the deepest chamber beneath Earth's capital city. A massive communication array had been built there, powerful enough to send messages across intergalactic distances. The array was still active, but it was not sending signals. Instead, it was listening. Dr. Yen, the expedition's communication specialist, spent days analyzing the array's logs. What she found changed everything they thought they knew about the human departure. "They are not just hiding," she announced to the search team. "They are watching." This array has been monitoring all galactic communication networks since the day they left. They know everything that has been happening. The humans were aware of every crisis, every failure, every struggle the galaxy had faced in their absence. They had seen the power grid failures, the communication breakdowns, the agricultural collapse, and the rising tensions between species, but they had not returned to help. This revelation sparked heated debates among the search team and the council, members monitoring their progress. Some argued that human behavior proved they had never really cared about the other species. Others believed the humans were conducting some kind of test, waiting to see if the galaxy could solve its problems without them. Ambassador Zeth had a different theory. As he stood in the communication chamber, looking at the massive array that connected Earth to the rest of the galaxy, he thought about everything they had learned about human nature. Humans solved problems. It was what they did naturally, almost compulsively. The idea that they would simply watch other species suffer without helping was completely contrary to everything he had observed about human behavior. Unless they believed that helping too much would make the problems worse. The final piece of evidence came from Captain Juan's personal logs, discovered in a secure vault beneath the military command center. His last entry, dated the day before the humans left, contained a message that explained everything. "We have become a crutch that the galaxy leans on too heavily. Every time we solve a problem for others, they become a little less able to solve problems for themselves. We thought we were helping, but we were actually making everyone weaker and more dependent. The threats Admiral Kang identified are real, and they are coming. When they arrive, the galaxy will need to fight with all the strength and creativity that each species possesses. But that strength has been hidden behind our solutions and our mediation. We must leave so that others can rediscover their own abilities. The galaxy must learn to work together without us, or it will never be strong enough to survive what is coming. We will be watching, and we will return when we are needed most. But first, you must prove that you can stand on your own." 6 months had passed since the last human disappeared from galactic space. Ambassador Zeth stood before the rebuilt council chamber, looking out at representatives from across the galaxy. The room was different now, not because of the technology or the furniture, but because of the beings who filled it. The Galactic Council had lost 78% of its economic output in the first 4 months after the humans left. Entire star systems had gone dark. Trade networks had collapsed. Agricultural worlds had struggled with famine. Communication breakdowns had sparked conflicts that should never have happened. But something remarkable had occurred in months 5 and 6. The galaxy had begun to adapt. It started with the young ones. Students like Kresh, the young Vorthak who had written to Zeth months earlier, had refused to give up on the integrated education that human teachers had started. Working with classmates from other species, they had created study groups that met in virtual reality spaces, sharing knowledge and maintaining the friendships that their teachers had encouraged. These young beings became bridges between their own species and others. They translated not just languages, but ways of thinking. A young Makari named Leth had spent weeks learning to think quickly like a Vorthak, so she could help during emergency situations. A Zalathi collective called Bright Thoughts had practiced individual decision-making so they could work with species that did not share group consciousness. The breakthrough came when these young beings started solving real problems. When the agricultural crisis on Kepler-9 threatened to cause starvation, a mixed-species team of students analyzed the soil chemistry using Makari patience, Vorthak determination, and Zalathi collective intelligence. They found a solution that adult experts had missed, a simple adjustment to the soil's mineral content that could be made using locally available materials. Dr. Nell, a Makari scientist who had been studying human research methods, made another crucial discovery. She realized that humans had not been solving problems through superior intelligence, but through superior collaboration. They had succeeded by combining different perspectives and approaches in ways that no single species had attempted. Following this insight, Dr. Nell had organized the first mixed-species research project since the humans left. Vorthak engineers provided quick analysis and rapid prototyping. Makari scientists contributed long-term thinking and careful testing. Zalathi researchers offered collective processing power and parallel investigation. Together, they had rebuilt Engineer Dam's power distribution systems. The new designs were not exactly like the human originals, but they worked just as well. More importantly, representatives from all 3 species now understood how the systems functioned. They were no longer dependent on a single engineer's knowledge. Similar projects had begun throughout the galaxy. Mixed-species teams were finding new solutions to problems that had seemed impossible without human help. The transportation network was being rebuilt with backup systems that multiple species could maintain. Communication protocols were being redesigned to work even when some translation systems failed. But the most important changes were cultural. Admiral Kree had established the first truly integrated military command structure, with officers from different species sharing decision-making responsibilities instead of relying on human advisors to coordinate between them. The new system was slower than human-mediated cooperation had been, but it was also stronger because it did not depend on any single species or individual. Council leader Vextar had implemented new diplomatic procedures based on what they had learned about human methods. Instead of seeking quick agreements that papered over differences, the Council now spent time helping different species understand each other's perspectives before making decisions. The process took longer, but the agreements that resulted were more stable because every party truly understood what they were committing to. Trade was recovering too, though in new forms. Merchant cooperatives had replaced individual traders like Hyun, with representatives from multiple species working together to facilitate complex interspecies commerce. The cooperatives were less efficient than human traders had been, but they were also more resilient because they did not depend on any single individual's knowledge and relationships. Medical cooperation had been the most difficult challenge to solve. Without Dr. Min and other human physicians who had bridged the gap between different biological systems, cross-species healthcare had nearly collapsed. The solution had come from an unexpected source. Young medical students from different species had begun sharing their knowledge through virtual reality training programs, learning to understand alien biology by experiencing simulated versions of different types of bodies and minds. A Vorthak doctor named Kess had spent months learning to think with the slow, careful consideration that Makari healing required. A Makari healer named Groot had practiced the quick, decisive treatments that worked best for Vorthak physiology. Together, they had developed new medical protocols that could be used by any species to treat patients from other species. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy understood itself. The crisis had forced every species to confront an uncomfortable truth. They had become dependent on humans not because humans were superior, but because they had been willing to do the hard work of understanding and cooperating with others. Each species had retreated into their own strengths and preferences, leaving humans to handle the difficult task of bridging differences. Now, faced with the choice between learning to work together or watching their civilization collapse, the galaxy was choosing cooperation. It was not easy. Vorthak impatience clashed with Makari deliberation. Zelathi collective thinking confused species that valued individual decision-making. Cultural misunderstandings still caused problems, and old prejudices died hard, but progress was being made, one small success at a time. Zeth thought about all of this as he prepared to deliver his report to the council. 6 months ago, he would have been speaking to a room full of beings who expected someone else to solve their problems for them. Today, he was addressing representatives who had learned to solve problems together. The economic recovery is ahead of schedule, he announced to the assembled delegates. Agricultural output is returning to pre-crisis levels. Communication networks are functioning at 95% efficiency. Military cooperation exercises are proceeding successfully. But the real news was what he said next. 3 days ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected a signal from beyond the galactic rim. The encryption patterns match human communication protocols. The chamber erupted in excited voices speaking dozens of different languages. Through the cacophony, Zeth could hear the same question being asked over and over. "Are they coming back?" He raised his hand for silence. The message was brief but clear. It said, "We have been watching. You have learned to stand. The choice is now yours." Council leader Vextar stood slowly, his ancient reptilian form showing signs of the stress and growth of the past 6 months. "What choice do they mean?" Zeth activated the holographic display that showed the message in its entirety. Captain Juan's face appeared, looking older but peaceful. His words were simple. "To the Galactic Council. You have proven that you can work together without our mediation. You have rediscovered the strength that we accidentally helped you forget. The threats Admiral Kang identified are still coming, but now you have the unity needed to face them. We offer to return, not as your problem solvers, but as your partners. We have learned much in our time away, and we believe we can contribute to the galaxy's defense without making you dependent on us again. But the choice must be yours. You are no longer the civilization that needed our help to function. You have become something stronger, a community that chooses to work together because you understand its value, not because you have no other option. If you wish us to return, send a signal to these coordinates. We will come home. If you choose to continue building this new galaxy without us, we will respect that decision and remain guardians from afar. The door is open. The choice is yours. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some representatives argued that human help would be valuable in facing the coming threats. Others worried that accepting human assistance might lead back to the old patterns of dependency. In the end, the decision was unanimous, though it surprised everyone, including Zeth. "We choose both," announced Council Leader Vextar. "We invite humanity to return as partners, not as caretakers. But we also choose to continue building our strength together. We have learned that our diversity is our greatest asset, and that includes human diversity." As the signal was prepared and sent toward the coordinates Captain Juan had provided, Zeth reflected on how much had changed. 6 months ago, the humans had been essential to galactic civilization because they solved problems that others could not or would not solve. Now they would return to a galaxy that had learned to solve its own problems, but chose to work with humans because cooperation made everyone stronger. The cost of the human departure had been enormous. Economic collapse, system failures, communication breakdowns, and the near loss of an entire generation's education in tolerance and cooperation. But the toll had also been educational.